For most people, weddings are a chance to celebrate love, dance badly, and pretend they know how to ballroom dance after watching a few online videos. For me, family weddings were competitive sporting events where the main activity was seeing who could make the most jokes about my career. I arrived at my cousin's wedding reception directly from a 12-hour hospital shift. My feet hurt, my back hurt, and I was running on enough coffee to legally qualify as a small power plant. Still, I forced a smile as I walked into the beautiful outdoor venue. Within 30 seconds, my Uncle Farid spotted me. "There he is!" he announced loudly. "The professional Band-Aid distributor!" Several relatives laughed. I sighed internally. Here we go again. My aunt joined in immediately. "Tell me, are they letting you use the big boy stethoscopes yet?" More laughter. I smiled politely. "You'd be surprised." "Oh, look at him," my cousin said, trying to sound important. The frustrating part wasn't even the jokes anymore. It was the fact that they were years behind reality. Back when I was younger, I'd worked as a nurse while attending medical school. It had been exhausting, but I'd survived it. Eventually I'd graduated, completed my residency, and become an emergency physician. A real doctor. The kind with student loans large enough to qualify as a national emergency. Unfortunately, my family had apparently stopped paying attention somewhere around year 3. In their minds, I was still the kid carrying clipboards and handing out ice packs. Trying to explain it had never helped. So I stopped trying. I grabbed a drink and escaped toward a quieter section of the reception. The wedding venue overlooked a beautiful lake. Strings of lights hung above the dance floor while guests mingled beneath large white tents. For the first time all evening, I relaxed. Then someone sat beside me. "Should I ask for an autograph?" a woman's voice asked. I turned. She was stunning. Dark hair, bright eyes, and a smile that looked dangerously capable of causing poor decision-making. "What for?" I asked. She nodded toward my relatives. "Clearly you're some kind of celebrity. They've been talking about you nonstop." I laughed. "Trust me. Not the good kind of celebrity." She introduced herself and explained she was a friend of the bride. As we talked, I learned she worked in biomedical research. Unlike most people at family gatherings, she actually seemed interested in medical science. It was refreshing. We talked about hospital stories, impossible patients, research breakthroughs, and ridiculous workplace moments. For the first time all day, I found myself genuinely enjoying the conversation. Then my aunt appeared from nowhere like a guided missile programmed for embarrassment. "There you are," she said. I immediately knew this wasn't going to end well. She pointed at me. "Don't let him fool you. He likes acting important." The woman beside me raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" My aunt nodded enthusiastically. "He's basically been playing nurse forever." I closed my eyes briefly. "Please stop talking." The woman glanced at me. "You work in healthcare?" "Something like that." My aunt laughed. "Something like that? Listen to him. Next thing he'll be claiming he's chief surgeon." I considered correcting her. Instead, I took a sip of my drink. The woman seemed amused. "Well, whatever he does, he sounds passionate about it." That answer surprised me. Most people either joined the jokes or awkwardly changed the subject. She simply smiled and continued talking to me as if my relatives hadn't said anything. Strangely, that meant more than she probably realized. As the evening continued, we spent more time together. Every conversation felt easy, natural, comfortable. Whenever relatives interrupted with another joke, she somehow managed to redirect the conversation back to something interesting. At one point, my cousin approached our table carrying a plate of food. "Careful," he told her. "If you get a paper cut, he's your guy." I stared at him. He looked very pleased with himself. She blinked. "That joke wasn't even medically accurate." I nearly choked trying not to laugh. For the first time in years, someone was actually on my side. As the sun slowly disappeared below the horizon, guests crowded onto the dance floor. The groom seemed determined to break some sort of unofficial wedding dancing world record. Song after song, he refused to sit down. Meanwhile, the temperature remained surprisingly high. Even from across the reception area, I could see people sweating. The groom especially looked overheated. I frowned. Years in emergency medicine had trained me to notice small details. Flushed skin. Heavy perspiration. Slight unsteadiness. Nothing alarming yet, but enough to catch my attention. Beside me, the woman followed my gaze. Something wrong? Probably nothing. I hoped I was right. Across the dance floor, the groom raised his arms triumphantly as another song began. The crowd cheered. But something about the way he moved suddenly didn't look right. And my instincts began whispering that the night was about to become far more interesting than anyone expected. I had learned long ago that whenever my medical instincts started whispering, I should listen. Across the dance floor, the groom's smile was fading. Most people were too busy dancing, eating, or filming videos to notice. I noticed. The woman beside me noticed my expression immediately. "You're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "The healthcare worker thing where you're staring at someone like they're a complicated math problem." I laughed. "Occupational hazard." The groom wiped sweat from his forehead for what looked like the 10th time in a minute. His face had become unusually red. His movements were slower, less coordinated. I set my drink down. "Excuse me for a second." Before she could respond, a loud cheer erupted from the dance floor. The groom attempted an enthusiastic spin. For a brief moment, everything seemed normal. Then his knees buckled. The applause stopped instantly. He hit the ground. The entire wedding froze. Then chaos exploded. People screamed. Someone dropped a plate. 3 different relatives started shouting contradictory instructions. "Get water!" "No, don't move him!" "Someone call his mother!" "Why would we call his mother?" another guest yelled. "Because she's his mother." The argument somehow continued while the groom remained unconscious. I pushed through the crowd. Years in emergency medicine had taught me that panic spreads faster than any illness. By the time I reached him, half the guests were talking at once. One aunt was trying to fan him with the dinner menu. Another guest was attempting to force a glass of juice into his mouth. "Stop!" My voice cut through the noise. To my surprise, everyone actually listened. I knelt beside him and quickly checked his pulse. Fast. Too fast. His skin was hot. The signs were obvious. Heat exhaustion combined with dehydration. Fortunately, it appeared treatable. "Move back and give him space." People obeyed immediately. It was almost funny. 5 minutes ago I was apparently the family clown. Now everyone treated my words like military commands. The woman from earlier knelt beside me. "What do you need?" I pointed toward a nearby table. "Cold water. Towels if you can find them." She moved instantly. No hesitation. No questions. I appreciated that. Meanwhile, several relatives stared at me nervously. One cousin shifted awkwardly. "So, you actually know what you're doing?" I looked up. "That's generally how jobs work." A few nearby guests laughed. Even in the middle of a crisis, I couldn't resist. The cousin looked embarrassed. "Good." The woman returned carrying water bottles and towels. Together we began cooling the groom down. Our teamwork felt surprisingly natural. At one point our hands bumped while reaching for the same towel. She smiled. I smiled back. Not exactly the romantic setting I'd imagined, but life rarely followed scripts. The groom slowly began responding. A good sign. His breathing improved. The tension among the guests started easing. Unfortunately, some members of my family remained committed to misunderstanding reality. My uncle crossed his arms. "See? I told everyone he'd be useful if somebody needed first aid." I stared at him. The woman beside me nearly laughed. "First aid?" she repeated. "He was literally running the entire situation." My uncle shrugged. "Same thing." I was about to reply when a familiar voice sounded from behind the crowd. A voice I recognized instantly. What's going on here? I turned. The crowd slowly parted. And the moment I saw who had just arrived, I realized my family's favorite joke was about to die a very public death. The crowd parted slowly, and the second I saw who was walking toward us, I almost laughed. Of all the people who could have appeared at that exact moment, it had to be him. The chief of emergency medicine from my hospital. He had apparently been invited through the groom's side of the family. The timing couldn't have been more perfect if the universe had hired a comedy writer. He took one look at the situation and immediately recognized me. "Doctor!" he called out loudly. Every conversation stopped. Every single one. The word echoed across the reception area. Several relatives physically turned their heads toward me. My uncle blinked. My aunt froze with a half-eaten piece of cake hanging in midair. Even the DJ seemed confused. The chief walked over and glanced at the recovering groom. Then he looked at me. "Excellent work, doctor. You handled that exactly the way I would have." The silence became painful. I could practically hear my family's collective brain malfunctioning. My cousin was the first to speak. "Doctor?" The chief looked confused. "Yes, doctor." Then he smiled. "One of the best physicians in our emergency department." I briefly considered warning him. But honestly, after years of family jokes, I decided to enjoy the show. The chief continued speaking. "Actually, he's being modest if he hasn't told you. Last winter he led one of the most difficult trauma cases we've had in years." Several relatives stared at me as though I had suddenly transformed into an alien. The chief wasn't finished. "He also mentors younger physicians, consistently receives outstanding patient reviews, and somehow stays calm during situations that make the rest of us panic." My aunt slowly lowered her cake. My uncle looked like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. The chief shook his head and laughed. "I still don't know how he manages it." The woman beside me folded her arms and grinned. "Oh, this is getting interesting." I couldn't disagree. For years these people had acted as though I spent my days handing out tissues and taking temperatures. Now reality was arriving like a freight train. One relative cleared his throat. "Wait, you're saying he's actually a doctor?" The chief stared. "Actually a doctor?" The confusion on his face was priceless. "Of course he's a doctor." The relative pointed toward me. "But he used to be a nurse." The chief nodded. "Years ago." The relative looked stunned. The chief continued. "While attending medical school." Now multiple family members looked as if someone had unplugged their brains. The woman beside me bit her lip to stop herself from laughing. Unfortunately, she failed. A snort escaped. Then another. Soon she was laughing openly. Honestly, I wasn't far behind. My aunt finally found her voice. "You never told us." I raised an eyebrow. "I did." "You did?" "Several times." A long silence followed. Then my cousin suddenly remembered. "Oh." Another cousin pointed at me. "Oh no." A third cousin covered his face. "Oh no." The realization spread through the family one person at a time. Every joke. Every nickname. Every condescending comment. All directed at an actual emergency physician. The woman beside me was enjoying herself far too much. "So let me get this straight," she said. "They spent years mocking a doctor for not being a doctor?" When she said it out loud, it sounded even worse. The chief burst out laughing. A few nearby guests joined him. My relatives looked like they wanted the ground to swallow them. Then, as if the evening wasn't embarrassing enough already, the recovering groom opened his eyes. He looked around at the circle of shocked faces surrounding him. "What happened?" Nobody answered. Instead, nearly every person present looked directly at me. The groom followed their gaze. Then he frowned. "Why is everybody staring at him?" That question triggered another round of awkward silence. And for the first time all night, I realized my family's favorite joke had officially died. The groom sat up slowly while several guests helped him into a chair. His color was already improving. The panic that had swallowed the reception only minutes earlier was fading, replaced by something far more entertaining. Embarrassment. Specifically, my family's embarrassment. The kind that arrives when years of confidence suddenly collide with reality. The groom looked around. Seriously, why is everyone staring at him? Before anyone could answer, the chief laughed. Because he probably saved your wedding. The groom blinked. Then he looked at me. Wait, you were the one helping me? Apparently. Thank you. His gratitude was sincere. I appreciated that. Meanwhile, my relatives seemed trapped in a collective identity crisis. For years they had treated me like a walking punchline. Now they weren't entirely sure how to interact with me. My uncle approached first. The same uncle who had spent the evening calling me Band-Aid Boy. He cleared his throat awkwardly. You know, I've always been proud of you. I nearly injured myself trying not to laugh. The woman beside me wasn't nearly as restrained. She burst out laughing immediately. My uncle looked offended. What? She pointed at him. Sir, I've known him for 3 hours and even I know that's not true. Several nearby guests laughed. My uncle retreated. Defeated. Next came my aunt. Suddenly she wanted everyone to know how supportive she'd always been. According to her revised version of history, she had apparently encouraged my career every step of the way. Unfortunately, several cousins remembered otherwise. Arguments immediately broke out. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. No, you called him a professional thermometer holder. I never said that. You absolutely said that. The woman beside me was enjoying every second. So this is your family? On their best behavior. That's terrifying. I nodded. It really is. As the evening continued, something unexpected happened. I stopped feeling annoyed. For years their jokes had bothered me. Not because they hurt my feelings, but because they showed how little they understood the work I loved. Tonight changed that. Not because they finally learned I was a doctor. Because I realized I no longer needed their approval. The people who mattered already knew who I was. My colleagues knew. My patients knew. And standing beside me was someone who had respected me before she knew my title. That mattered far more. The reception slowly returned to normal. Music started again. Guests resumed dancing. The groom even returned to the dance floor after promising to drink enough water to supply a small village. The chief eventually headed home after congratulating the newlyweds. Before leaving, he shook my hand. See you Monday, doctor. That single word caused another wave of discomfort among my relatives. I smiled. The timing was perfect. Later in the evening, the woman and I found ourselves standing near the lake. The lights reflected across the water. The music drifted through the warm night air. For the first time all evening, things felt peaceful. She nudged my shoulder. You handled tonight well. I mostly tried not to laugh. I noticed. She smiled. Then she looked at me. Would you like to have dinner sometime? Preferably at an event where nobody collapses. I stared for a second. That sounds ideal. Good. She handed me her phone. Put your number in. I did. Best wedding gift I'd received all year. As we walked back toward the reception, one of my cousins intercepted us. He looked genuinely confused. So let me get this straight. That depends. You're actually a doctor? Yes. Like a real doctor. That's generally how being a doctor works. He nodded slowly. Then he pointed toward the dance floor. And you still used to be a nurse? Yes. His expression softened. That's actually pretty impressive. For the first time all night, there wasn't a joke attached to the statement. Just respect. I smiled. Thanks. Then another cousin yelled from across the reception. Hey! Does this mean we can't call you Band-Aid Boy anymore? The entire family turned toward me. Waiting. I looked around at their hopeful faces. Then I grinned. You can call me whatever you want. They looked relieved. I paused dramatically. As long as you remember that apparently I've been playing nurse so well that people keep calling me doctor. For a moment there was silence. Then laughter exploded across the reception. Even my relatives laughed. Especially the ones who had spent years making the joke. The tension vanished. The wedding continued. The groom recovered. The family learned a lesson. And I left that night with something far better than an apology. I left with respect that had finally been earned, a promising new romance, and the satisfaction of knowing that actions had accomplished what arguments never could. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's letting them discover the truth all by themselves.